We are officially recording. We are we have a nice full house today, and we have a special guest. I think every 4 to 5 years, I'm able to convince Melissa to run a call like this. And shockingly, then us living the quarantined life, we've got we're spread out over the house. Chase was kind enough to mute Fortnite for us, so that's helpful. Avery's in her back room watching God knows what kind of YouTube videos. And Melissa hijacked my command center, and I'm at the dining room table, soon to move outside if they're actually done with the lawn. So anyway, we're all living this life. But obviously, I was really excited to set up this call with Melissa because she's run this a couple times before, and it's been one of those really, really important topics that just isn't covered very often. And we're going to do a little Q&A, but she's going to be going through just how to be a great significant other in this business, and then how to communicate effectively and be a great partner for your significant other as you're pursuing, an entrepreneurial endeavor. And this is really important stuff because our significant others aren't getting the kind of coaching that we get all the time. And again, as entrepreneurs, we're a minority part of the population. So I'm really excited to dive into this sucker. And obviously, we got a whole bunch of questions sent to us. If anyone wants to know what good preparation looks like, Melissa has spent hours and hours and hours preparing, and that's just what a pro does. So anyway, I'm excited for me to stop talking. Obviously, Melissa, we're going to start with the easy little icebreaker. Have you considered how you have the greatest situation possible during the quarantine, that you get 24 hours of me? I mean, who could be in a better spot than you? Let's just start there.
Yeah, you're going to hear a lot of dead silence after that one. We're surviving.
Okay. All right, so let's get into we're going to start with a little bit of the end in mind, and then we'll work backwards. About 15 years ago, so I started, as you know, and most people on this call, maybe some do, some don't, but I got started 2 weeks before we got married. So 3 years as a sports writer, I transitioned into slinging some office supplies, B2B, straight commission, and I made that move 2 weeks before we got married and did our honeymoon and all that fun stuff. That was, a little more than 15 years ago. So I got a real simple first question for you. Has it been worth it? We'll start easy.
This is where I say yes, right?
Yeah, this is where you say yes, exactly. Remember the programming.
It's definitely been worth it. No, I was thinking about this, we're in a different position now with just obviously everything that's going on than, when I've run the call before. It's never been during a pandemic. But I've just we've all had so much time to reflect and think about things. I just feel really, really grateful, especially now. I feel super grateful that we're all here together, that we're in a position where we can react proactively to all of this, that we can take all that we've learned over the past 15 years and use it now with our kids. Obviously, I'm just thankful to have a house and food on the table and all those things, and that my kids have this wonderful, safe neighborhood to live in, and that we were able to, through all of Joe's hard work, we were able to buy a house in our mid-20s that now, if we were to buy the same house, would be twice as expensive. Those are all obviously, there's been a lot of cool material things that I'm grateful for. And then just, of course, just all the amazing friends we've made. Like so many of the faces that I see are great friends of ours. And I think a lot of times that gets overlooked of just we are surrounded constantly by just amazing people who start out, as reps and then over time just become incredible, amazing friends. So I'm super grateful for that. But just off it, like with this coronavirus situation, I think what I've been realizing and noticing is how my kids are experiencing this and how different they're experiencing this than a lot of families. And that is solely from all those decisions that were made so long ago, all the hard work, all the experience with sort of dealing with other different kinds of crises, and how all day long my kids are hearing Joe talk positively to his, to all you guys, and the guys in his office and all of you guys. They are walking by his office and hearing him just proactively responding to a crisis and having that sort of measured confidence and that wisdom and that calm. And so I hear from a lot of my friends about their kids being really worried about all of this and really stressed out and having just a really negative experience at home. And that has not been our experience at all. And I attribute that so much to Joe, because that is what they're hearing. That's what they're around all day long, is just that positivity and that we're going to get through this. And so when all this happened and Joe had to find an office somewhere in our house because we don't have a separate office, I feel like the kids were able to really see this as a fun thing and help Joe, set up part of Chase's room. And so all of this to them is a real positive thing. Now, I also want to say that's not to say that we ignore the fact that people are really suffering. Like, just because we're in this position, we are in this position because our hard work has allowed us to now look to see how we can help others. And so I feel like that's a super awesome thing that we can teach our kids throughout all this, is that hard work, the reward of it is that you get to help others, and we can find ways of doing that because people are suffering. It's a really, really awful, crazy time for a lot of people, and that's the reward of all the hard work, is that you can look for ways to help others. So anyway.
Yeah, and sorry, was that good?
What's that?
I was making sure you were done. I didn't want to cut you off.
Yeah.
Okay. So, so obviously that's a little bit of a snapshot on kind of where things are at today. 15 years ago, we were, I guess, what were we making? Like in the mid 30s, I think, mid 30Ks, working at those thriving newspapers that had such high potential as an industry.
I was making 39, which was like, I thought, amazing. Like, I had my little 401k.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe go back, we're talking about today, but 15 years ago, again, we're leaving our, or you eventually did the same thing, but, we had our journalism backgrounds, our newspaper backgrounds. I was pretty miserable with that stuff, not being able to control my advancement or whatever. And then I make this move as we're getting married. All of a sudden, hours change, the approach change, everything. Like, there's a lot of changes to that. Can you kind of walk people through what that was like 15 years ago?
For sure, yeah. And there's so many people on this call who've heard this all before, so you can just kind of like mute me and make your lunch. But because I tell this same story like every time I do this call. But yeah, Joe and I were both working. We were both working in newspapers. We were both, our careers at that point were just super similar because we were both journalism majors. We had just graduated. We found jobs at competing newspapers in the Bay Area. we were working 3 p.m. to midnight. We had to work every holiday because the newspaper still has to obviously go out on, Christmas and Thanksgiving. And so we never ever got to spend holidays with, our families. And what was cool about it was just that we were in the same position. So even though a lot of our friends were working normal, like 9 to 5 jobs, we at least could hang out together. We would, get home at midnight, hang out, have the mornings together. But we were both, it was super miserable. Just in terms of, there was no opportunity for growth. Honestly, I feel like we felt like we were already like in our 50s, 60s, and we were 21, 22, 23, just because everyone we were working with was just like, had been there for a long time. It was just a very sterile, negative environment. So, I mean, I knew Joe wanted out of that environment. I wasn't quite there yet, but he knew he wanted to do bigger things. And so when he found this job, which, right, it was 2 weeks before we were going to get married. We, at that time, like by that time, we had been together for about 5 years, some of that in college, and then, the 3 years with the newspaper. But it was obviously shocking because he then was working during the day. I was still working at night. And all of a sudden I could see his mindset completely shifting. And he was looking toward the future and being positive and thinking, having a vision, having goals for the first time. Like, I always tell this story, but I remember we were like at the mall with my sister, and Joe was talking about getting a cubby. And my sister was just like, he's never going to use that. Like, she's just like, he's never going to use that. And it's just hilarious to think back. Like, she had no faith, but it was just, everything was new. And I appreciated, and part of me was like, okay, this is really cool. But it was also scary because I wasn't there mentally yet. It's also, I think what I think about a lot is that in the beginning, as you guys know, there's a lot of sacrifice. There's a lot of putting into the bank, like all the calls you guys are on, all the long days and doing sales and all those things. You put a lot into that bank, but you're not taking the withdrawals yet, and that's the same as a significant other. You are sacrificing and you see this vision, but it seems so far in the future, and it's hard to grasp, and it's hard to on a daily basis know that what you're doing is going to come to fruition. I also remember there was a time, so when I did finally was able to leave the newspaper, we were kind of a little bit more working sort of similar hours. And I was working for a company that did active travel. And so we got the opportunity to take a trip to the Canadian Rockies. And I was super excited. It was like the first time we were going to be able to take a vacation, since we had gotten married. And we put down the deposit on the trip. It was going to be, with my company. And Joe came to me one day and was like, I think we have to cancel. Like, what? And he's like, yeah, I think I'm building my team. I'm getting close to assistant manager. It doesn't make sense for me to abandon my team for even just a week. So much, as you guys know, can happen in the span of a week. And obviously that sucked, it was like, no. But I look back and I see that that's just we had to put that in the bank. We had to make those deposits before we could make those withdrawals. So does that help?
Yeah, and two things, right? One, how did we celebrate the vacation, the replacement vacation? Do you remember?
And we were able to take that vacation within maybe a year after that.
It was about 8 or 9 months after opening up the office. I said, hey, I'll get an assistant manager, we'll train him, and then we'll go do that trip. And we actually probably did a better trip, and we were making money on that trip. I'll never forget, I told Jamie that I wasn't going to get on a conference call, and we were on a 30-mile bike ride through the Grand Tetons. And I literally just seen a bald eagle. And I was like, oh, look at this, my call's up now. And I logged on for like 20 minutes to a conference call out in the middle of this unbelievable area. And I was like, boy, this is an interesting way to work right now. So, and I got one other thing I'm curious of. You mentioned a little bit about goals. I know one of the things that was challenging early on was when I started talking about having lots of goals, and you sort of felt like you didn't necessarily have a whole bunch of those because neither of us really did that at the newspaper. Can you just kind of talk about how difficult that was? Because I think sometimes we don't get the fact that, we're getting excited about where we want to take our career and we share that enthusiasm, but there is sort of a negative impact if we're not considerate of our significant other with that. Does that make sense?
Yes, like absolutely. I think any significant other who's on this call, I'm not sure how many there are, but I think we can all relate to the fact that it's such a rare circumstance that you guys are in to get all of the coaching you guys get and all the training and the support. And you have people who genuinely care about your growth and about your lives and are checking in with you all the time. And they want you to succeed. And it's a much, much lonelier road as a significant other of an entrepreneur if you don't have that. And I think it's pretty rare that you would have that. You might have some of that in your own career, but as far as making, there's a lot in the background. There's a lot just behind the scenes. I feel like one of the things that I want people to understand is that there is a lot of heavy lifting on both sides. It's just that what you do is going to be very different. And that doesn't mean, like, obviously there's plenty of significant others of entrepreneurs who have their own careers and all of that. But what I mean is there's a lot of sacrifice that goes in and a lot of heavy lifting that obviously, can tend to get overlooked, but it's just as vital. It's just as important. It might look really different. But I think that's why people need the support and need to be able to reach out to people who understand. And I think what happens, this happens so much early on where I would feel super isolated because there was nobody else in our 20s who were doing what Joe was doing. So yeah, they might work 40 hours a week, but they did not understand the sacrifice necessary. And I don't even know if Joe knows this story, but like, I remember being at breakfast with our good friends, Kevin and Kelly, and Joe hadn't gotten there yet. And they had seen him be at the newspaper and have all the, go to Warriors games and cover Warriors games. And it was such a cool job, and he had just started, doing sales, selling office supplies. And I remember being at breakfast, Joe hadn't gotten there, and they were both kind of like literally like, so what is Joe even like doing? And like, why is he doing that? And I think they were confused, and there was definitely a sense of like, why on earth is he like humbling himself like this? Like what is going on? And you, as a significant other, you want to sort of like reach out and talk about these things and like talk about how hard things are, but who are you going to talk to about it? Because you don't really have, if you talk to your friends and family, they're going to want what's best for you. And a lot of times they think that by in their effort to support you, a lot of times that means being like, yeah, why are they doing that? Like, why are they working so hard? And what are these team nights all about? And they're like going out with their, their team. And there's like probably all these like, other people there, you know, in their 20s, and like you're here without them, and in their effort to support you, a lot of times it can make you feel more alienated. I think a lot of times I would feel like I had to defend what Joe was doing, but it was also really hard. I'm sure we can all relate to that, right? Where you're like, you're having problems with your significant other and things are really stressful and you are, you know, arguing or whatever, but you also don't want someone to talk shit about your significant other, you know, like we've all been there. And so that happens in this business a lot, because you know what they're trying to do, you respect it, but that doesn't mean that it's not super hard sometimes. So if you don't have somebody who's actually been through it, then you're probably going to get really terrible advice like I got. Friends just want your problems to go away, right? They don't necessarily know how to help you through them. So that's why I love it when people do talk to me about this stuff, because I certainly never felt like I had anybody remotely to talk to about this. So a lot of it was just figuring it out on our own and sort of like failing a lot and figuring out what worked for us. It was definitely not, you know, not pretty at all. I feel like I think it took probably the entire time that you were a rep, for us to figure out a lot of that stuff. But I guess just to circle back about my story about Kevin and Kelly, it's just so funny because I remember feeling kind of just that, like, feeling like I had to defend Joe, but knowing deep inside, like, we're doing this for a reason, and it all will work out, and we will come out of this like so much stronger. I know Joe has a vision. I felt confident about things. And it's just funny now because they own a business now. They took over her dad's business. And a few years ago, they actually had to buy it. And I remember just the stress on them of like now owning a business. And now our conversations are so 15 years later are, as you can imagine, so completely different. And we talk now as entrepreneurs to entrepreneurs and talk about the struggles but like so completely different than that first conversation. Also, I'll just add this in, like, I'm sure you guys can relate to like just things that your parents say that is just like super negative that you have to overcome. And that happened all the time with my mom. You know, Joe talks about how my mom will always be like, when she visits, she'll be like, you work such long days, and you must be exhausted. And they would say all kinds of negative things. But then you can understand, like, as soon as he gets, you know, promoted, my mom will be the first one, like, oh, we just always been so proud of you. And like, you know, it's just, that's just how parents are. And just try not to like let it get to you. Just try to have the confidence. You know what you're doing. You know that parents want what's best for us, but it doesn't always translate, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've never been more exhausted in my life than when your mom would ask me that question about being exhausted. The thing with Kevin and Kelly is interesting too, because, you know, so Kevin's one of my oldest friends, and I've known Kelly since I was in high school, and it has been interesting to watch them basically sort of 15 years behind us go through the grind of building a business with that long-term vision in mind. And I don't know if you and I never really talked about this, but it's nice. I mean, we've been crazy supportive. We've been able to encourage the work that they've done and the hours that they have to put in and the difficulties that they encounter. And I don't think either of us have ever pointed out to them that they didn't do that for us. But I do think it's cool to sort of see that. And I think there are a lot of people that, unfortunately, when they have the energy to build a business in their early, mid, late 20s, they don't get it. And then when they're in their mid 30s, late 30s, early 40s, that's when they want to, and they've got far less energy and far more responsibilities. And so, you know, getting this perspective down now is really important stuff. You know, we were talking about, when we were kind of talking about this call, I brought up an example of, you know, how sometimes significant others, right, they know us really, really well. They probably know us as well as anyone. And again, that could be boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, that could be a parent, that could be brother, sister, whatever. And sometimes their concerns are pretty valid, right? And you know, you mentioned that probably the most important thing that I ever did was that I backed up what I said. And I think that there is a role that a budding entrepreneur needs to take on to earn the support of their significant other. I don't think it's supposed to be automatic. I think that if I was sleeping in every day and partying every night, I don't know that you would have been like, yeah, this is a great move for our future. So can you just kind of talk about that piece of sort of what the entrepreneurs on this call need to do to sort of justify the support that they're asking for?
Yeah, for sure. I think, right, we often talk about like, how do we get the support of our significant other? And in order to have the support, you just have to have the trust. Like, there's no way around that. And I feel like your significant other sees all of it, right? Like, they don't just see the business professional, you in your suit and tie, and when everyone's around, and the, you know, the end of the day speeches. Like, they see all of you. And so if you're coming home and you've had to be positive all day, then you come home and you're just like super negative, how are they supposed to buy into that vision? um so the trust comes from doing those same things every day, like really having that positivity throughout your life. And yeah, I mean, I would say that's the number one thing you always did, is that you had the vision, but you were doing the steps. Like, there was never, I really think that's probably the thing that made the biggest difference for us, is that I never ever had to question your work ethic. I never had to question your character. I never had to question that, like, you were doing this for us and for our future. Um, and it's so easy, as we all know, it's so easy for that trust in the beginning is so like tenuous, you know, it's so like hanging on by a thread as you're like having to again make a lot of sacrifices and navigate this like new life. And so you have to go above and beyond to earn that trust through um you know, all the things we can imagine, right? But just the hard work ethic, and really carrying that over into your personal life. And um yeah, just realizing that if you're going to have all these big goals and talk about all these big goals, you you really have to show the person that you're putting in the daily effort, and you have to make. And on the flip side to that, I think sometimes what happens with in certain relationships that I've heard is that sometimes the person, you know, the person in the business is so positive and so like always up here, that sometimes you forget that they're like a real person who has like bad days, because they're, I remember just being like, oh my God, Joe's just always so like even keel, never stressed out. And sometimes that's when I would just be like, I feel like we sometimes get in our biggest fights because it seems like I couldn't even like relate to him anymore. And then he would show me, no, I mean, I've got this on my mind, I've got this on my mind, this is going on, this craziness. And I'd be like, wait, really? Like, that craziness is going on? Like, I had no idea, because you seemed so perfect, you know? So I think there's a balance. What I really appreciated is that Joe would ask me my opinion a lot with like business stuff, and you still does. And I think that's such a good way of making this an us thing. you know, when you feel like your opinion is like valid and you feel like you have stuff to offer, and that it is like such a team thing, because really it all comes down to being a team. And that was a really helpful thing early on, because it made me feel vested, like invested in Joe's team, because I like he wanted to know my opinions on, you know, who I thought had the you know, sort of like the capacity to grow into a leader and all these things. So that was like, I think that helped a lot too.
Yeah, and then just, I think one of the things that you just mentioned there too that's really important is, early on we always had ideas of what we wanted life to look like, but then we chose these paths early on as journalists that would never have gotten us to those goals. And I think that the other thing that you and I did was we talked about sort of what we wanted and what we were looking for life to look like. And the goals for the company that we were building was a family business. The way we thought about what needed to happen with the company was to get our family to our goals. And again, I think it takes that doing the things you say you're going to do to teach people that you have the stamina and you have the tenacity to stick with it. But then it also takes, partnering and talking through. We had lots of options with, being able to bring a nanny in when we had Chase, and being able to work from home, or you not have to work. And all of those things were how we talked about our business pretty early on. And I think that a mistake I made as a rep was my goals, I, and I eventually figured out, if I'm trying to do this as a team and trying to do this with support, it's going to be more powerful if we actually talk and act and respect each other that way. So I think that's a huge piece of backing it up.
It's a huge, well, yeah. And if I could just touch, like, that is, if you take one thing away from this, it is that it really does. It does have to be a team. Like, there's just no way around it. You cannot, like, you can't compartmentalize being an entrepreneur. There's not, you can't just say like that's so. If you have someone in your life who's willing to to do that, to like work their asses off for you, I think that's amazing. And so sometimes when, I'll say that sometimes when I hear like significant others are having a hard time, right? Do they see how much just like activities cost and how much, it takes to put down 20% on a house. Or so it's really cool to be able to do that together. And it is all about figuring out what's going to get through through the hard times by thinking about those really cool payoffs in the future.
Yeah, and just,
And if you're someone who's in this business, that means you work your ass off. We all know what it takes, right? So that means, like, if you're on this call, you already have that. You have to have someone who does the same. I'm not in the business, and like our jobs look so different. We basically have not even like, we have nothing really in common, obviously parenting, but our daily life looks so different. But we know the other person is working their ass off in their own way. So just having that respect, I think it's really hard when you're with someone who you don't really feel like they have that. Like, I don't know how that's going to work longevity wise, there's something else.
it doesn't, by the way. That's the nice way of saying it. It's
like that.
You're saying it the nice way. It's not going to work long term. Is what's going on there.
And things change, like roles change over time. I mean, there were times in the beginning where my role was to have like a really steady 9-to-5 job, right? So that we could just kind of like afford for Joe to like be able to like make mistakes, right? And grow, and like it was more of that steadiness. And then it was like I got the opportunity to be a stay-at-home mom, which is what I wanted to do for a time. And so that was just amazing to be able to do that and to not have to wonder, like, can we afford this? We were able to. So the roles change, like things are definitely going to change over time of like what situation guys are in, what jobs you guys are each going to have and roles, but the respect doesn't change.
Right.
Hey,
obviously we've got some people on this call who maybe right now they're not, they don't have a significant other, and they might be very grateful for that status right now. They're like, this sounds like a lot of work. Like I'm happy that I don't have to deal with any of this stuff right now. But for the people who are on this call who don't have a significant other that they're thinking about this with right now, I'm sure they either have someone on their team that they're coaching who does, or they will have someone on their team who has this type of situation. And obviously, it's not okay to just not manage the situation or try to help someone through working through this process with your significant other. So, what advice would you have for the people who this doesn't affect them right now, but it will affect them as they build their teams and how they help other people through this situation? What advice would you have for those people?
Yeah, I mean, I just see it kind of like peripherally. That's how you say it. But like over the years of what I've seen a lot is owners or assistant managers or people building their team, and someone on their team is coming to them with like serious like shit is not going well at home. Like it's I'm having all these problems with my significant other about, regarding the business. I don't know how to handle it. But then they don't really reach out to people who can help. So then like 2 months later, they're having the exact same issues. Their significant other still hates the business. Like nothing has been worked out. I mean, if they even get to that point, I feel like one of the things that really honestly like hurts me is how many amazing, wonderful people who have left the business because they didn't have the support. They didn't ever really figure out how to figure this out with their significant other. They never really figured out how to make it all work. And a lot of that is because there's just kind of this void of support. And if you haven't really been through something, you're like, it makes sense, right? Like you guys are all able to lead your teams with every aspect because you've done it yourself. And that's like the beauty of the business is that you've already gone through these things. You can say that happened to me, that happened to me, that happened to me. But if you haven't gone through a relationship in the business, you really don't know how to support somebody. So it's so key to, there's so many resources we have. Like I'm looking at their faces now. They've all had successful relationships in the business. So there are people to reach out to. Like Joe said, I do this call like every 4 years, but I also, talk to people at R&R, different conferences, and people will talk to me about it then. Like I do hear, like definitely people come up to me and have questions for me, but as far as calling me, I'll tell you over 15 years, I've had 2 calls, like literally 2 people have actually called me and said like, I need help with this, or like, what's your thought on this? And I always hopefully try to make myself, well, I shouldn't say I try to make myself available when I do this every 4 years, but I'll tell you now that I'm available, and Joe knows, and like you guys know, and Ryan knows, and Franco knows, like anybody can call me, and just reach out. Yeah, just reach out, because I think people are so like worried about talking about their relationships when it's like, why? Everyone has issues, everyone has struggles, and why is it easier to talk about sales than it is about problems in your relationship? Like it's nothing new, So like I wish that I had that, because there was a lot of things I probably could have avoided, and I didn't have that at all. There was nobody to reach out to when Joe was starting out, like literally no one. So it is my like privilege. Like I would love to actually, help out.
All right, we're coming down the home stretch here. We got about 10 minutes left. So I'd share with you a couple of the comments that I've gotten so far. One says that you're the GOAT. That's a sports term. that people use for, baseball, basketball, football, the good sports. He's the greatest of all time on this topic. So that's pretty cool. One's talking about how you need to write a book on how you're married to an entrepreneur. Fun fact, the shameless plug in the book that's above you right now that Chase basically stapled to the wall. You were the editor of that book. So that's pretty cool. And somebody else mentioned that we need to get you an ICL code, which means you should be running one of these things. So anyway, you're getting some nice comments so far. So 10 minutes left. We'll see. I got one more to hit up, and then we'll see if we got any little time for Q&A or whatever. But any other, not just the significant other part, but just any other benefits from sort of the entrepreneurial lifestyle? Because I think that's something that, hey, it's negative when you're going to the office 7 days a week, and then it's positive when, you take off time because you want to take off time. I'm just curious if there's any other benefits of the entrepreneurial lifestyle that maybe you wish you had been aware of or that surprised you, anything like that?
For sure. I think early on, I kind of just thought about it like financially in terms of like, okay, we're doing this because we need to buy a house someday. We're going to have kids someday. Like I thought about it more in those terms. I think when you're in your 20s, I think that there's this like sense of like, everything's just going to, maybe this is just a me thing, but I just remember having this feeling of like, everything's going to kind of like work out. And like, yeah, if you work hard, like, well, like we'll get a house and things will get figured out. You don't plan for crises. You don't think about how, okay, over the next like 30 years, 40, over the next 15 years, and then in the future, like you're going to have these crises come up. And we have encountered like several crises throughout the past 15 years. Some of them business related, some of them totally personally related. But I think one of the coolest things is flexibility with everything in our life because we have control over those things. So we're not looking for permission from our bosses. We're not looking for permission from anybody. We're figuring out how we can do everything we want to do, how we can do it on our terms. Last year, Joe, are our kids in the room? Wait, they are. Okay, can you take yourself off?
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of you guys know, like we had like a health crisis with our son, and it was 3 million times harder than coronavirus to us personally, obviously not pandemic wise, but to us, like what we're going through now pales in comparison to that. And it was the hardest thing we've ever had to handle in our lives. And I probably only seen Joe cry a few times in our life. And there were times when he was on his knees crying, and so was I. And it was absolutely horrendous. And never in a million years did I think 15 years ago that what we were doing was like preparing for crises. Never did I have that thought. But so many of you guys on here, I'm like, again, I'm looking at your faces. You guys have been through hurricanes. You guys have been through personal hurricanes, and you've been through really, really hard things. And that's why you're on this call, because you're going through something hard now and you're overcoming it now. And you're going to overcome other things in your life, and things are going to like get thrown at you that you just could have never imagined would actually happen to you. But just know, like, what's been so cool is that along the way, you're like learning how to handle really, really hard things. So when shit really hits the fan, you can draw on all of that. And there were times last year when I would call Joe and he needed to come home in an emergency, there would have been no time to ask a boss for permission, you know? And there were times when I needed him to drop everything. And he had people, again, who I'm seeing the faces of, who completely stepped up, helped us out, ran conference calls for Joe, helped us in a million ways, showed support, had our backs, cared for us. And I'll always be so grateful for that. And so just remember that what you're doing right now, it might seem sometimes like drudgery. It might seem like, okay, when is this going to pay off? But I promise that it will, and will happen in ways you couldn't have even imagined. So I'm thankful for that flexibility. I'm thankful that we learned a lot of lessons like on a small scale, never knowing they would really come to be helpful on a much larger scale. So when this crisis is over, just remember, like, that's during our normal daily life that gets really hard. Just remember, it's a privilege to be able to like work. It's a privilege to be in those times of like prosperity and calm and working hard, because there's gonna be times when all of that you'll be so glad you did, because you really need to, again, make those withdrawals, and all the stuff that you put into that bank and all the hard times will be so worth it. And that definitely happened with us a year ago, and luckily things are so much better. But it's through that now when this happened, it hasn't seemed like we're not having the like emotional reaction we might have if we hadn't gone through all those like really tough things.
Yeah, that's awesome. I see why you didn't want to lead with that story. That'd have been a tricky one. We're right up against it. I apologize. I know a few people have sent in some questions now, and just we're just kind of up against it at the moment. But any closing thoughts? Any last couple things? I mean, obviously, I already know there's gonna be a million people who send me notes thanking you for this. It's been fantastic. The perspective, the preparation, the care. I mean, obviously, it's amazing stuff. Is there anything that you can think of that just, I don't know, any final words or final thoughts or anything that we didn't cover that you think is super important?
No, I would, if someone has a question, like, definitely ask it. And again, I'm just available. But yeah, anybody have a question that they felt like didn't get addressed?
There's one right there in the chat.
Oh. Did you realize the value of canceling the Canadian Rockies trip in the moment? I feel like there was this sense, like, I think we all have that, like, deep down knowledge when you know you're doing the right thing, even when it sucks, you feel good about it. So I definitely think there was a lot of that in the beginning, where that breakfast with our friends Kevin and Kelly, it bugged me, but also deep down I was like, I knew Joe would do everything he said he would do. I knew there would be those moments that we looked back and were excited about the choices we made. So I think deep down I did, I realized the value of that, even if I wasn't outwardly pleased.
Good stuff. Well, we'll look forward to the next version of this call 4 or 5 years from now.
I'll have more wrinkles and,
more wisdom. We'll have more wisdom. Yeah, all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah.
All right. So, hey, everyone, have an awesome day. And, this is a good way to start off for me. So, thanks, hon.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, Melissa. I like seeing everyone smiling.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.